This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening and welcome to Artist Talk on Art on Monday, November 6th, 2023. Thank you for joining us. I'm Miriam Deutsch, Artist Talk on Art Programming Director. ATOA was founded in 1974. It's the art world's longest running and preeminent forum. We are now in our 49th year. Our archive resides at the Archives of American Art of the Smithsonian, and this month we will add to our collection there, bringing our ATOA archive to more than 1,000 recorded events featuring over 8,500 artists. Comments made by our presenters do not necessarily reflect those of ATOA. And a little commercial next week, Monday, November 13th at 7 p.m. Please join us when we will feature environmental artist Tasha Depp on her use of detritus in art making. Tonight we have ATOA's president and founder Doug Shear moderating the color sculpture panel. So nice to have color as our main topic. Music background.
Miriam, you're muted. You're muted.
Okay, I guess. Doug Shear is the only child of two painters who were WPA artists, artist union members, and Hans Hofmann students in New York City and Provincetown. And he grew up in New York City's Greenwich Village. He was educated in New York City Rhodes School, where pop artist Jim Dine was his art teacher, and at Rhode Island School of Design. Doug is a painter, and he was a pioneering video artist who ran the Egg Store video facility in Tribeca in the 1970s and served fellow video artists, including Nam June Paik, Charlotte Moorman, Twyla Tharp, Bill Viola, Merce Cunningham, and Yoko Ono. In 1974, he was a co-founder of Artist Talk on Art, and he currently serves as its president. Doug has shown his abstract paintings widely. He has served as a board member of the Woodstock Birdcliff Guild and currently serves on its exhibition committee. He is also a member of the education committee of the Samuel Dorsey Museum of Art at SUNY New Paltz. Doug created and ran the Birdcliff Forum during the pandemic period and was the producer of its Zoom programs, including its 10-part Woodstock Masters series event, and curated an exhibit of those artists called Sense of Place. So now I'd like to turn the program over to Doug.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to explore the use of color by three contemporary sculptors, Mario Quilles, Shelley Parriott, and Victoria Palermo. Since its inception, Artist Talk on Art has featured in its talks from the 1970s forward a wide variety of sculptors working in a wide range of materials and approaches. Many of them, such as Forrest Myers, Carl Andre, and Louise Bourgeois, did so without color being an important component, or where they might have chosen a single color instead of multiple colors. A few have used color predominantly, among them those who appeared with us. I think of Marisol, George Sugarman, and William King. But harking back to the earliest periods of art making, we saw the Egyptians, the Greeks, and Romans, and others who used layers of colored paint to coat three-dimensional statues or bas-relief art. Alas, most of them are devoid of the original colors they had. We know their use of color only from the few traces that remain on the works in worldwide museums. Tonight's three featured artists utilize color as a central component to their work, each very differently. I'll now begin by introducing Mario Quilles, who lives and works in Las Vegas, New Mexico, not far from Santa Fe, where he frequently exhibits. Mario has worked as the New York City art director for several organizations and originally attended the High School of Industrial Arts, the Cooper Union, and Glendale Community College, where he studied clay chemistry and hand building before working in raku firing. He creates clay sculptures by focusing on rolling out clay on rubber mats as slabs with texture coming from canal rubs, and then hand builds and controls the texture on the outside. With his love of color and airbrush finishes always being reflected in his work, he ends with glazes of airbrush gradations, blending various colors, and works from the inside out with homemade hammers. Quilles has exhibited at Red Dot Gallery, National Hispanic Cultural Center, Morgan Gallery, East West Gallery, and Lever Brothers Building Gallery, and many other places. You can also see more of his work at www.marioquilles.com. And now I turn it over to Mario.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. My work. Oh,
Go right ahead, Mario.
oh, okay. Well, my work comes from a childhood that I got a fabulous Marx Brothers, Marx toy mobile tank. Just after World War II, I took the liberty of opening up all of the tabs and taking the tank apart to see what made it work. And I was never able to put it back together. So the following year, my Christmas present was clay. And as my dad would say, you can't break that now, can you? And so I ended up making figures and army combat troops and all that kind of stuff. And but I did always like drawing. So I ended up leaving regular schools and going to the School of Industrial Arts, and then left that, and a couple of years later got back into Cooper Union. And in the meantime, I ended up going into corporate identity, which was a whole other world of the use of color, because you could, at that time, after PMS came out with their color system, you could trademark a color, so that Eastern Airlines two stripes, indigo and another name for light blue. Next slide, please. Anyway, what it ended up being is learning about color control and trademarking colors. I've worked for a variety of other design companies, and at the end of my stay in New York, before moving to Los Angeles, I interviewed with a couple of companies in Los Angeles, and ended up moving there. I had gotten tired of the educating clients on understanding why they needed to have a particular and solitary idea about who they were. I learned that at Lippincott Margulies, and moved on. And in LA, I got lucky and got the California Restaurant Association, who offered a free graphic design service that I did for a couple of years.
Next picture, please.
Next. But then,
Go to another slide.
Yes, this is just as tight.
okay, these are pieces of my imagination, seeing the Pacific Ocean, and then moving here to Santa Fe, where there had to be at one time living objects under a 1 mile ice situation. And I thought about the cactus there, who developed their own protection from birds eating they hold water, and they can easily be picked off. So thorns came into mind, and I had a house surrounded by cholla. And my own experience was that cholla could recognize temperature that came by them. So our warm bodies would attract them to stick you with a thorn. This was a theory. I don't know if it's fact or scientific. But I thought, well, why did they develop thorns? And it was to protect themselves
Next slide, please.
from being attacked. Anyway, this piece that showing right now, because I speak Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, I call this the dangerous apple, manzana peligrosa. And it's in the collection down in Albuquerque at the Hispanic Museum. It was made with porcelain and clay, and then low fired. Other than that, it's just an imagination of things that occurred in nature, and without being able to authenticate the possibilities, you're allowed to run free with your mind. And so next that you can do, next slide. It's being underwater for so many centuries, there was always the object of finding sunlight. But sunlight is what makes things grow, whether we want to admit it or not. So my feeling was that there were objects that were looking and searching for light. And all of these pieces that I've done are not vertical stand-ups. They're leaning because they're looking to get some sunlight to grow. And it happens that that's the same thing with your garden. And you can play with the flowers to turn them around, and in a couple of days, they will be back looking for the sun. So that's one of the elements. Next, please. Okay, then these are assemblages of horns, again, looking for sunlight, but grouping, because grouping, like humanity, helps you survive. And so the analogy is that the colors vary because of the amount of light that they can absorb down deep in the ocean. And you have kelp that's incredibly green, and sand, and all kinds of life that exists in the ocean. Next, please.
Next slide, please.
Yeah, there we go. And the textures, the surface textures, can have a variety of effects. This piece has an awful lot of yellow dots on it, and the yellow dots are spores that are trying to survive from living on an object. And you see it where we used to go fishing and looking for mussels, because when you break them open, you can hook them on a hook, and they are as orange as can be, as anyone who eats mussels knows. And so that everything that in the ocean has enormous amounts of color. And I bring it back to the Bible. How come did Adam get tempted by an apple? It was the color of that apple that got him to think, hey, that's something to try. Let me go reach and get it. And I think color has that effect on human eyes. It has a pleasant effect, it has a loving effect, and it also has a hate effect. And I don't know if you realize, but there's never been a toothpaste that was in a black tube. Why? Because black is funereal and it doesn't attract someone to go reach for it. Next, please. So this is a piece. This piece won a prize for me, and I just like the fact that it had an orange interior, just like a mussel out of the ocean, and then a white exterior, which has that juxtaposition of two different colors for an object. And it was very well received. And another thing, it just, I came up with the idea of making things lean, and in clay work, it's very difficult to make things lean without standing and holding and propping. And so this was an experiment in propping that worked for me. Anyway, and I've done an awful lot of that support system. Next. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. These are in other words, as a kid, I used to go up around City Island fishing, and there were always these shells. What are they called? Crab shells all around the place, and they would come up on the shore late after the sun was out, and it just reminded me of objects that leave the sea at night and then go back with the tide in the mornings. So that these are all hollow pieces. They started out as cones, and then I collapse the cones in and leave the texture that I rolled the clay on to give me another dimension. Next, please. Okay, this is I saw the little animals that live way down deep in the trenches, and they live in front of hot volcanic heat coming up and through the orifices in a lot of structures down low. And I thought, why? No one's really done a volcano really underground. And I took the surface and I used small hammers to perforate from the inside outward. And so this was an example of that, playing around with another set of tools. Some just a dowel, a piece of dowel on a cork, because you got to reach in and perforate, make surfaces on the outside by holding the clay against your hand outside and by pushing on the inside. So the large bulbous pieces are done with a hammer, a round hammer, and you can see the results and augment the whole surface to look like something that it wasn't, you know. Anyway, next piece. These again, in Spanish, the word is caracol. And caracol is a seashell, basically. And there are plenty of them. If you walk along the Gulf of Mexico side of Florida, you are constantly impressed with what really these shapes are all about. And they're usually temporary rentals for crabs is basically what they end up being. And so I've done these in giant shapes. These are they start at 18, 20, and 28 inches. And I love getting a color on one side that didn't have anything to do with the other side, but that it made that shape important. Anyway, and next one, please. Okay, this is a shot on the table, on floor. Okay, usually it's tables that we use. But anyway, of the variety of what can be done with ceramic clay, low firing. I only do 06, but because the raku kilns that I make sustain 06, you have to lift them up and then put them in a secondary firing to get the appreciated color that they've become, and then dunk them in water. Because if you don't dunk them in water, they turn brown. So to freeze the ceramic effect and the glaze, you stop them from continuing to evolve in the clay surface and the color that you've applied. Next, please. Oh, this is one. Okay, well, you know, I grew up in the Bronx, New York, and there was a place called Jan's, not too far from where I lived. And the piece in the far end was a piece influenced by Jan's, who you had to have 4 people sitting at the table to order this. And this was called the kitchen sink. And everybody got a spoon, and you brought it on. It was old solid ice cream with cookies and whatever inside. Anyway, I did this piece just to do that memory that I still was holding. And it garnered a lot of attention. It's about 32 inches high and has speckles all over the vanilla ice cream, because I don't know if anyone remembers, but Breyer's ice cream had vanilla seeds, little speckles in it. And it was something that I've always appreciated. The other pieces are pillows, pillow shapes that have taken on very nice color work. And all the colors are sprayed. They're not brushed on. Spraying gives you the latitude of varying and making movement of the shapes that you do. And this is, which, oh, yeah, okay. That was the last one.
Okay,
Just,
so,
And you made his thing.
okay,
I just wanted to show the fact that cactus grow this way in real life, but I've taken the liberty of making them look like they were in the ocean. And they may have been. Anyway,
Thank
that's,
you, Mario. We'll come back to you after the
oh,
other two artists.
thank you.
You're welcome. Moving on to Victoria Palermo. Victoria has exhibited 2- and 3-dimensional work in art venues across the country with reviews in national media, including Sculpture Magazine, the New York Times, and 2 coats of paint. Solo installations and 2-person exhibits include Flowmation at Williams College Museum, Nature Park at Kid Space of Mass Mocha, Procrustes at Collar Works in Troy, New York, Flubber at the Conduit Gallery in Dallas, Texas, several one-person shows at the former John Davis Gallery in Hudson, New York, an early exhibition in Marseille, France, and 2 solo shows at the Courthouse Gallery in Lake George, New York. Sculpture grounds at the Fields at Art Omi in Ghent, New York, Chesterwood in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and the Salem Artworks in Salem, New York, have cited, that's spelled SITED, Palermo's outdoor work. Site-specific public works include Up and Down for the Albany International Airport, a bus shelter sponsored by Mass Mocha, and Camp Iris for the Hyde Collection in Glens Falls. She has been a NISCA NIFA Fellow twice, a resident at Yaddo, and has served as a NIFA panelist. She lives and works in Glens Falls, New York, and the Adirondack Mountains. Her education includes an art degree from Skidmore College and an MFA from Bennington College. And you can see more of her work at victoriapalermo.com. And now, Victoria. Unmute yourself, Victoria.
Okay. And share my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Here we go. So, first of all, thank you, Doug, for inviting me, and thank you for operating and presenting at Artist Talk on Art for almost 50 years. That's a very, very generous contribution to the art community. So, sculpture and color. For me, the two have always gone hand in hand. And for as long as I've made sculpture, color has been a strong component. As an undergraduate, I looked at the work, like many sculpture students did. I looked at the work of David Smith, and the caveat being that I wanted to work with soft materials, at a smaller scale, materials that I would feel comfortable with and that I could physically handle easily. And this piece that I made my last semester as a senior at Skidmore College is made simply with foam, cut foam, and wrapped with canvas and painted. So between undergraduate and graduate school, I painted theater sets. And I painted theater sets and installations for theme parks. I didn't know it at the time, but those experiences would have an influence on my developing work as I progressed as an artist. And only in hindsight can I see that. I went to Bennington College after about working 7 years at the theater set company, and went to Bennington College for an MFA, worked with Dean Snyder, the sculptor. My influences at that point were Linda Benglis and Eva Hess. I was attracted to organic shapes and soft materials. Yeah. I started working in rubber. And then from Vermont, I went to New York City, where I shared a loft with another artist. And this is the first work I made when I was in New York City. It was about 8 or 9 feet tall, and I made it with Post-it notes, which were readily available and familiar to my day job as an office temp. I also roamed the streets of New York, and in Chinatown, near my loft, at the outdoor markets, I found ginger root, which had a very organic and eerily anthropomorphic look. And would take those home to my little home studio and make compositions with clay and bits of ginger root, and then make a mold and cast in rubber. So this was, 6 inches, 7 inches tall, and made a series of these, each in a different color, and I would pigment the rubber. So the color was intrinsic to the material. I was able to get a larger studio, this one on West 26th Street. And at the same time, I was now also going to New York, upstate New York, where I'm from, hiking often, and I would collect moss and bring it back to the city, and made a series of these very organic looking pieces. This was about 3 feet tall, but about 6 feet wide. So you can see that this is slightly theatrical, and that's all I can say about that. There's moss, and you see there are water bottles strapped to the structure, and maybe you can see, maybe you can't, there are watering wires that are embedded in the moss. So there was an internal automatic watering system. It was a sculpture that was on life support because it needed water to exist. I continued in that vein, and I had an opportunity. I did several, there's a series of what I called lawn chairs. And this is the second location and the second making of these. These are larger. This is Art Oh My Sculpture Park in Ghent, New York. These pieces were there for about 3 years. And I designed steel structures, and I attached hardware cloth, and then filled the pieces with vermiculite and soil, and upholstered them then with sod. And the chairs would change in appearance over time because the grass would get really long and shaggy. And actually, I had this huge pair of scissors that the blades are about 2 feet long. So every once in a while, I'd go by and trim them. You may or may not be able to see moisture on the ground. These were in the middle of the field. Each chair was sighted to look at another sculpture. They were quite large, and actually 2 people could sit in one chair, but they were sighted to view other sculpture in the park. By this time, I had moved back upstate after a few years in New York, and continued to make work. I opened a studio in Glens Falls, New York, where I was living. Here's another version of lawn chairs. I was asked by Kids Space, the Kids Space Museum at MassMoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts, to make a new version, a kid-size version. And with this, the Kids Space, if I'm sure some of you have been to MassMoCA, Kids Space is the outreach program to the general community in that area, and they invite school children in, and they go out to the schools and do programs related to the artists or artist who is showing in their gallery. So in connection with this exhibit, I went out to the schools and did a residency and worked with the kids. This is a multi-part, so you can see this piece as well has a very obvious support system. So this exhibit was called Nature Park. Rob DeMar was the other artist in this two-person exhibit. You cannot see his work in these photos. But it was kind of like a nature theme park. And again, the theme park sort of keeps coming back to haunt me as I continue to make art. On the left,
That's interesting.
right,
Right.
on the left, you'll see what looks like maple saplings, but they are, I cast a real maple sapling. I made a rubber mold with a plaster mother mold. It was about 7.5 feet high, maybe 8 feet high in my studio, that I put on this hinged frame that I could lower up and down to take the mold apart and take out the casting and then put it back, pull the pulley, the rope on the pulley, and have the mold be vertical again, but upside down, and I'd get on a ladder and pour in the rubber. So I had a maple sapling production operation going on in my studio. It's all the same maple sapling, but because it's flexible rubber, each one is hung a little differently. It looks a little different. And there was a sound component too with nature sounds. It's a very tactile material, grass, very familiar. So it's not just color, but it's texture in this instance. This is part of this is about cultured nature. And I made a series of sculptures from formed dirt and a moss slurry. And these sculptures grew over the period, became somewhat hairy over the period of the exhibit. We had a plant light underneath, and these were sealed, so the moisture just would recycle. And when moss grows differently in a space like that, so instead of being short, it sends out spores, so it looked like
It's Melissa.
something different than moss. And that's another shot of the trees. This was about the time that the sheep Dolly was cloned. So this was my idea of, duplicating, cloning the same tree, and each time a little different. So I would say that mistakes in the studio are to be the most important things that happen. And on one of my versions of the tree sapling mold, an earlier version than you see here, saw a minute ago, I had a leaky mold, and this rubber leaked on my studio floor and covered a few things incidentally. It was a mistake, but the surface of that dripping poured rubber was very luscious, and to me, something to try working with. And that started a whole new body of work. I started making drip dripping and coating forms with this rubber that I would pigment, and it had the consistency of maple syrup. And I'd use a spatula, and first I would hang objects and they would drip. Eventually I'd make a base. It was a process, but I love the process and I love making up processes. And people always said they wanted to lick these sculptures. And the other thing about it was this material was very slow drying. So you can imagine that process of the material, the liquid material, gradually, very slowly solidifying. And I liked that sense of gravity that was carried through. So as I worked, I was able to make larger pieces and started to make installations. I was invited to do an installation at the Williams College Museum of Art. And I designed the wallpaper, which each round unit that you can kind of see was sort of an abstract version of what the sculpture would look like if you were hanging from the ceiling looking down. I put this floor-to-ceiling sculpture in the middle, was called Starship, and it's surrounded by smaller pieces. And I put all the sculpture in that room. It's a triangular room. I put it all on shaped mirrors so that the sculpture was floating in pools of mirrored pattern from the walls. And here's another picture of that room. So those pieces actually still had, I was coating things like plastic champagne glasses and balloons. But some of those objects, the balloons would deteriorate, but some of those objects would stay inside. But then I devised, through process and experimentation, a way of making these sculptures hollow. And I did it, and again, this is quite tall. This was about 7 feet, 6.5 maybe. The size of a tall person, taller than I am. Totally hollow. And I would use containers and balloons and make the pieces in sections. When they were strong enough to stand on their own, then I would put them together into one big structure, stack them and put many more layers of rubber. This is all, again, it's a polyurethane based rubber that I pigmented and would spatula on. So here's, I know people like to see how things are really made. Here is the messy process where you see, I don't know if I can, okay. Thought maybe I could use a pointer. So I would do things like stack Tupperware containers and put enough layers of rubber on so that I could cut the form, the hollow form, and take out everything that was inside and then sew it up and then put more rubber over it. So in the end, you'd see no evidence actually that it was ever cut and repaired. You see on the left, then I started to vary even more the kinds of objects that I put inside. A lot of studio detritus, boxes, crumpled up newspaper. It was fun. It was always playtime in the studio. Here is an exhibit that I had at John Davis Gallery in Hudson. And titles of these pieces, the one on the left, which is sort of a riff on Brancusi piece. My piece is called Calamus Interruptus. The center form that's red was made with pie plates that, of course, went away. So the whole piece is hollow. And it's because it's rubber, like that orange and red piece. If you touch it, it sways, even though it's about a 6 foot tall piece. The piece in the middle The title is Einstein's Spooky Action. And that's his crazy theory about how similar objects in different parts of the world can have effect on each other and imitate each other. So this piece was made by piling studio detritus and slicing the structure open and then taking everything out and then putting a lot more, many more coats of dripping rubber. On the right, you see a form that was a bit of an outlier in this show. And this is the point where I started to drift from very gradually over a period of years from very organic forms to geometric forms. Here's another one of those pieces. And actually the bottom of that piece was, the shape was made from a stepping stool that I had in my studio. But these pieces were very transparent, and you can start to see how light started to play in the way I thought about sculpture, light and color and translucency. The other thing that happened was this wonderful drippy, sticky material that I loved, I became allergic to, and I developed a respiratory reaction to it. I could no longer work with the polyurethane-based rubber, and I switched to silicone rubber, which is very body friendly. But it also behaves differently. I was already starting to make geometric forms, and this really launched me more rapidly into that direction. This material would not drip. I could cast it, and then I could coat things, but it just behaved differently. And I worked with this idea of seeing color through color, an overlapping color that changed as you walked around a piece. So again, I'm trying to involve the viewer, asking the viewer to do some work and to walk around the piece and decide, okay, which, do I want to mix some color today? Okay, I will just walk around the piece, and that, and that red and that blue will become purple when I move around. So here's two photos of the same piece from two different angles. And these were the consistency of hard Jell-O. So if you touch them, which I always wish people don't touch them because they leave fingerprints, but they move. So if you jiggle a table, they move like Jell-O. And there's sort of a contradiction in that because these are architectural pieces. So, making architecture with something you couldn't possibly use a material that is Jell-O-like. So it's kind of a fun idea. So this piece I'm going to show you a second view of here. As you walked around these pieces, they really changed. So as I'm making these pieces, I'm imagining myself inside and what it would be like to be as if one was sandwiched in, say, a Rothko painting. Here's an expanded version of the same idea using wood and colored plexiglass and intentionally put together in a very expedient way with just tacking things together. So after making many of these little structures, I talked to the director at Kid Space, my old friend, Laura Thompson, and showed her a model I had made. And I said, I had this great idea for making something larger. And our conversation led to the museum sponsoring a bus shelter for the town, again, an outreach into the village. So I did this through, and I did a residency with the school children. They all made models. I worked with the bus shelter company to reproduce the model I had made. I enjoyed going to the bus shelter and talking to the people who take the bus every day, and a lot of them commute to work. And the bus along that corridor from Williamstown to North Adams and beyond, that's how people get to work. And I love the idea of someone sitting on a bench and looking at the city and the downtown through these colors and just having a transcendent moment in the beginning of their day. If any of you have, maybe some of you have walked through Albany Airport in upstate New York, they have a wonderful art program. One of the best that I've seen anywhere in the country, to tell you the truth. And they asked me to do a proposal, and I did. I proposed. Now, when I make a proposal, I make a scale model and I recreate the actual interior of the space and put in lighting and everything. So I proposed that I make this structure that would be placed over the stairwell that goes from the mezzanine, where people would go through security and people would wait for other people arriving off their flights. But this, if one continued up that stairwell, it would go to what was a floor size gallery. That almost the entire third level was art gallery at that point in the airport with changing exhibitions. The name of this piece is Up and Down, which is what basically people do all day when they're traveling by air. And this is a very lightweight object, even though it spans, actually starts at the ceiling, it comes down in the middle of space, turns at a right angle and goes to the wall and continues down in those tiny steps. Everything in this sculpture was actually out of reach of people. No one could reach it. The steps themselves were faced with plexiglass with dichroic coating. Now, dichroic film reflects one color while its complement passes through. So I can show you another view of it. You can see that from different angles, the colors are look different, and also the reflections look different depending on your viewpoint.
How many more pieces do you have to show, Victoria?
I have, let's see, maybe 10, and I can go through these pretty quickly.
If you would, please.
Yes, absolutely. This is Camp Iris, a 3-part installation that I made for the Hyde collection in Glens Falls. They were the shape of A-frames, but also the shape of tents. And these were placed so they were overlapping. So you would see color over color. Here's another view of the same pieces the following summer. This was installed in Stowe, Vermont. And this was making the work in my studio. The model in the foreground. During this time, my husband and I were able to build a cabin on a small lake in the Adirondacks in a location where I had a lot of family history, have a lot of family history. And this is a view from my studio here. That's actually where I'm speaking from. And I was struck by, I had this constant view of the lake and these tall verticals that are bounded by color on either side. And those colors change as the reflections change. It started a whole new body of work that was installed on the wall. This is a 7-foot high piece based on a geological formation, actually not on our little lake, but on Lake George. It's called Rogers Slide. The history has to do with an event during the French and Indian War. And here are just the reflections, the constant reflections in the lake. And that it changes, you know, minute to minute, you know, with the sky or, you know, with the foliage. This is a photo I took of a work in progress in my studio. You can see in the photos, usually of the sculpture, I try to avoid reflections because you would just see a mirror of the entire room. Here you see the mirrored surfaces that these planks get. I'm using poplar wood planks that I put together, and I individually pour them with layers of translucent resin that's been pigmented. So the layers have a lot of depth, and it's my attempt to try to duplicate that feeling of looking into the water and seeing the reflections and the depth of color. Here, this piece is cleft. This is, I'm always running out, eager to get that momentary pink in the sky or the orange in the water, because you wait 10 minutes and it's gone. And this is the most recent piece I did. This piece was shown at Zurcher Gallery in New York on Bleecker Street in a group show with a couple of other new pieces of mine. Again, stressing verticality, but also movement and changing color with changing light.
And that,
Thank you.
yes, thank you. We're going to move on to Shelley Parriott. Shelley is an international artist with degrees from Rhode Island School of Design and Boston University. Her work has been exhibited and commissioned in New York City, throughout the Hudson Valley, and at galleries, museums, and various locations throughout the US and Europe. She has received numerous honors and awards, including a grant from the US Embassy related to New York Meets Berlin, an invitational exhibition at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin, and won Best in Show at Silvermine in the national juried competition, Art of the Northeast in New Canaan. And the New York Foundation for Arts and New York State Council for the Arts grants, and a Lorenzo Il Magnifico medallion at the Biennale International Art Contemporanea, Florence, Italy, and was recently in the Venice Biennale in 2022. From miniature interior wall pieces to large-scale installations, Parriott's concept begins with our passage through existence. Quote, existence is the medium through which every aspect of being is transformed, end quote. Overlapping layers of experience translate into sheer sculptural layers that interact with each other, the participant, and the environment. And you can see more of her work at colorfieldsculpture.com. And now, it's lovely to introduce Shelley Parriott. You need to unmute yourself.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm so honored to be with all of you, really. I really appreciate this. Thank you. And thank you for helping me with the technology, Miruna. Thank you. And Miriam. I would like first to show a lovely video that was made by Out of the Woods Productions when I was invited to be at Mountain Jam Music Festival in Hunter, New York. And it's just a 2-minute video, but it's very exuberant and it's fun. And if we could show that, that would be great. We'll see if it works.
My name is Shelley Parriott. I'm an artist, primarily a sculptor. I'm originally from New York City. Now I live in Woodstock, New York. With my sculpture, which is transparent, that's the magical thing about it. It's made of industrial material, and yet it becomes transparent when imbued with light. And so it has a painterly quality. And these shears, these transparencies overlap with each other, and they create prismatic patterns. The natural light or the artificial light comes through it. It's just an amazing thing that happens. I had planned to create an art object that was a visual experience. And when the piece went up outside, a surprise happened. People of all ages walked right into the sculpture. So what happens is the community becomes part of the art. Some of the pieces that I display have been in sculpture parks, various galleries, sculptures for personal property, and for private venues outdoors. I call it color field sculpture. Everybody experiences it differently. That's the magical thing about it.
Thank you. Actually, Out of the Woods production had a smoother version of it, but you get the idea. And I want to be sure that I want to say hello. I'm very lucky tonight that the art installer that has worked with me since I think we said 2006 or something like that is here with me. I want Todd to say hello. He just happens to be here.
Being right in. Hi, everybody. I recognize several of you.
Yeah, Todd is here. He knows
Hi.
some of you. Because he installs work for various people. And really, I want to say that without Todd, probably none of this art adventure would have happened. But we did that installation the year that Tom Petty was at Mountain Jam. I think it was 2017. We did Mountain Jam 2 times. So I'm not sure which was which, but I think that was 2017. And then I have, I'm very emotional about this, actually. I was surprised at myself because I hadn't looked at all my work for quite a while in this way. I hadn't presented it in this way. And it brought back so many memories and so many people that I really feel I would like to acknowledge who have helped me. This, and I'll talk about it as we go through these images. This is the perforated metal that I use. It's aluminum, beautiful, heavy gauge, industrial aluminum that becomes transparent when imbued with light. It's just a magical thing. And as the colors overlap one on another, as was just said by the other artists, the colors change. And the light is a huge component of the whole situation. And we can go to the next image. That's just me. I just wanted to show you the perforations, and the shadows, obviously. And we can go to the next one. This was part of a one-person show in Salisbury, Connecticut, solo show. I think we had about 10 various sculptures there. And as you see, the people walk immediately into the work. It's not always the case, but usually. Okay, we can go further. Now, this was one of the much larger installations. I believe the tallest one of these pieces is 18 feet high. And the fabricator was the amazing Milgo Bufkin in Brooklyn, New York. And I wanted to mention them. And also the fact that I knew absolutely nothing about metal, about sculpture, about anything when this all started. And so these people that worked with me, the fabricators, were very kind and patient in explaining what had to be done. So this is about 18 feet high and 27 feet across. It's in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was an estate, which has probably now become a public park. And we can go forward. This is in Milgo Bufkin, a fabrication place. And they are one of the biggest fabricators in the world. They do work all over the world, up to any scale. And that's important because these can be created up to any scale, indoors or outdoors. They've been primarily outdoors, but that's not necessarily the case each time. So this was as they were being fabricated. That's it, we can go on. Oh, and then I want to say this. You know, the video we just saw was very exuberant and fun and externalized. These sculptures can also be very serene, healing, spiritual, quiet. And they can be either grouped together, as you see, as a visual object, or the individual units can be placed further apart so that people can enter the work. But the whole concept can range from very quiet, peaceful, contemplative, to very exuberant and just plain fun. So it all depends. Okay, we can go on to the next one. Oh, this was an amazing story. You know, I'm repeating myself to say I was very emotional because I haven't thought about this for a long time. This was at the Coral Springs Museum of Art. And this was indoors, although the pieces eventually moved outdoors. And it was Barbara O'Keeffe, the executive director, who managed to secure the funds, which was a miracle, for us to bring work from New York, to produce the work, create the work, ship and carry and drive the work from New York to Florida and install. Let's go to the next picture. I'm not sure which is the next image. Oh, that's okay. Well, anyway, the other one, the point is that she was really responsible for much of what happened with me. And I want to mention two other people. I want to mention the Lichterman family and yes, and Barbara O'Keeffe primarily, who really, because we were able to create so many pieces, she did this because she was opening, it was the inauguration of an outdoor sculpture park at the museum. And she decided that having a big show like that would be really exciting for the museum and the community, and it was fantastic. So that's what this was, and I really thank her. And we can go forward. This was indoors in Saugerties at Spaff, actually, another indoor situation, and we can go forward. Oh, this is in Boston, and this is neither indoors nor outdoors. It's sort of a covered roof over a main area at Government Center in Boston. And the lighting with the sculpture is very important. When it's indoors, it really should be properly lit. Outdoors, of course, hopefully the sun takes care of the situation. But when it's indoors or in a night venue, then it's important to have good lighting. And we can go forward. Yes, this was a warm and cool, the ups going up and down, the warm side and the cool side and of the staircase. And we can go to the next one. And this was in Durham, North Carolina, primarily outdoors. They have water, they're in a pool, and they wanted the cool palette. And that's what this one is. And we can go to the next. And this is to show that even, this is interesting to me, that the material seems very illusory, ephemeral, fragile, but it's very, very strong, and it can withstand the weather. And it looks beautiful in the snow. And you can see one color through another, one piece through another. I'd like to mention something else here. Another really helpful, wonderful place was Rameli Manufacturing in Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, which I had never heard of. And I want to thank Robert Brannon for finding this place for me. By researching all the fabrication places in the country, Rameli Manufacturing is one of the oldest. And they have helped me, taught me about the metal, the perforation sizes, the gauges. I can't even do math. I had no idea what was going on with anything. They really had to explain it to me. And, it was quite a learning process because, well, I'll go forward. I'll explain it afterwards. Yeah, we can go to the next one. Yes, this is to show again that we're fine in the snow. We love the snow. And, and here, this was in Florida. I believe this was part of that solo exhibition. I don't know, we had 10 or 12, and Todd, of course, was there, installed all of it. And that was quite a job, right? It was hot. It was such hot weather. And he was there installing. And that was the outdoor. A lot of people, a lot of interactive sculpture. And this was in New Paltz, New York. Interactive, people go right into it. And they have quite an experience because you see the different layers. I call it layers of experience as they walk through the changing patterns. So that was in New Paltz. And it's created, and these were all created by Romeli and powder coated. Here's another person that's been really instrumental. Was Jerry Duffy at Technical Coatings in Kingston, New York, who did the powder coating on all of these pieces for so many years. We've been working together for so many years, and very grateful to him. And I put this here because it does remind me of a color field painting. And when I first started to do this, I didn't have a name for them. We put them up outside, and somebody walked by and said, "Oh, that looks like a color field painting." So that's how the name. Overlapping transparencies, as you know, color washes, washes of color is the commonality between the sculpture and the color field paintings. Okay, we can go forward.
Shelley, I'm requesting that you just go a little bit more quickly through these now.
Sure. This one is just Mountain Jam. We don't need any more. We can go next. It's just another, we can just go right through them because it's the same idea. Oh, this is a beautiful transparencies. This is in Cleveland at a children's hospital in Cleveland. I wanted to show the transparencies. We can go to the next one. This is in White Plains, New York, as it's being installed, and we can go to the next one. And that's the installation in White Plains. And this is Cleveland Children's Hospital, again, another children's hospital. And this was, and this is, that next one is interesting because we matched the colors to the lighting inside the building, as you can see. And there's me in a hard hat, and there's a picture of the creation of the piece, but that's the installation. And that's just, a lot of people took photographs of the overlapping perforations, and that's just one of them. And we can go forward. And it's another one, overlapping perforations. And that's just another, it's a photo of the sculpture that looks like a color field painting. So is that the last one? Yeah. Oh, and this is just to show that there are feet at the bottom, and they get bolted into a base at the bottom of the piece.
So thank you very much, Shelley. What I want to do with some of our remaining time, and I do want to squeeze in a few questions or comments from people in the audience too, if we can manage that. I'm curious, I think what links the three of you together, not that you have to be linked, is sensibility related to color. And although there's more commonality between Mario and Victoria in both the nature of the organic nature of a lot of the work. Nonetheless, for each of you, and I would start with Mario, you've always been a colorist, right from your very roots, your very beginning as an artist. When we look at your work, which is mostly very organic, how do you conceive? How do you begin the process? Do you think about the form first, or do you think in terms of color, or is color a second phase for you? So how do you approach conceiving your works?
Well, the color part is the most difficult. I'll tell you why. You start out with basically a bisque piece of ceramics, and you have samples of colors that small tiles they were done to understand one coat, two coats, three coats. The problem with ceramic glazes is that they're all the same color. They look like Max Factor powder faced colors. They're either slightly pink, slightly white, but never green or whatever. So if you don't have test glazes, you don't know what you're going to get. I like to find colors from one coat to 5 coats. And the problem is when you have a piece that you spray, you need to mark where you start. So as you rotate it and spray it, you know where to stop. And so doing multicolor work has that basic problem. Spraying is a lot more control than brushing for me. I educated myself in using a spray gun. I've got 3 or 4 of them. Some have wide nozzles, some have minimal nozzles, and you have to know when to pick an overall spray and then come in. And the one problem that I've noticed on coloring is that if you don't do an even spray, it likes to chip off all by itself. You don't have to influence. It will just make itself out. And so understanding the in-betweens, and I use a lot of soap suds to make sure that the spray stays on, because it's granular. It isn't like paint. It ain't smooth.
Right.
It's granular little spray spots that you're doing. So that's one of the things you're fighting all the time. What I like about it, though, is that it's very, very forgiving. Putting brush strokes down is not as forgiving because they dry rapidly and they streak. And so airbrushing lets you smoothly cover the surface.
Okay, we'll move to Victoria for a moment.
Yeah.
So Victoria, my impression is accidents happen in your work style, your work approach, and you like those accidents. You revel in the accidents. The drippier, the messier, the better. And it's a form of discovery for you, even if you're working in slabs of color, as you do in the more geometric pieces that you do. Otherwise, whether you're in your organic mode or you're in your more geometric mode, it's all about some interesting quasi-planned little accidents that produce the blending of the color. And I would say it's very successful. But how do you conceive your pieces? Do you conceive them similar to what I've said to Mario from the what are you constructing perspective, or are you conceiving them more about the color right from the outset?
I am responding to the material. And usually the color is intrinsic to the material, or I add pigment. And I do tests. But I often would do maquettes sometimes, with the architectural pieces and use colored film, and also would just tacking things, taping things together to get the idea of a structure and how I want a color to interact. With the plank pieces that I'm doing, I start with colored paper, painting paper, cutting it up, and just looking at colors next to colors and shapes next to shapes. And sometimes, just two pieces of paper incidentally lying, on the studio floor, on the table, are the start of a piece, just reacting to something next to something. And then
Are you conscious of color in the same way that Mario is? Having been an art director, he was used to PMS colors. Are you that predictable about your colors, or is it
No.
more?
I know all that, but I try to forget it. And
Okay.
Generally I compose intuitively, and then sometimes I'll stand back and say, okay, I think that works, but why does it why does it work? And I go back to all my formal teaching about color.
Uh-huh. So moving to Shelley for a minute, it looks like from the very outset, Shelley, and you have to unmute yourself, by the way, that you are thinking about, complementing one color with another color. You're thinking about blending colors in virtually everything you do, although we did see a few pieces that were monochrome, that were monocolor. That's, unusual for you, isn't it? The norm for you is you're thinking about the relationship of a variety of colors, whether they're in a compatible range or whether they are not in a range.
Right.
So for you too, do you think, do you do like little watercolors where you're thinking about, do you sketch or in some way theorize what you're going to do on a big scale, on a very small scale first?
I used to do that, but I don't any longer. What I have the pieces fabricated without any color, and then when they arrive, as a shape, design and a shape, and then when they arrive, I take color swatches and put those onto these actual pieces to see how they would interplay with each other. And so I don't need to make the sketches anymore, because in fact, not about the color, but the fabricators, they make these fantastic sketches of the shapes and sizes of the pieces. Right. And then they arrive to me in this way. And then I just put patches of color, like little swatches, to make my plan of how they should be colored. So,
I've seen that you do pieces. I've actually seen a few of your pieces that are very small, tabletop, let's call them.
right.
Were those hand painted?
They're all powder coated. I'll say
Okay.
I used to paint them myself.
Right.
Try to do everything myself, but it does not withstand. It's better to have it powder coated.
Okay.
And yeah.
So I think we could go on talking like this, but my sense is, time-wise, it would be nice to take a few comments or questions from the audience members, who I invite to unmute themselves rather than trying to use the chat. So do we hear any comments or questions from our audience?
Yeah, I have some questions. Hi, I'm Babs Reingold. I'm also a sculptor and painter. And Victoria, I had a couple of questions about the differences in the silicone and the rubber. And I also wanted to comment how much I just love your play and experimentation, because I'm one of those people that loves to play and experiment. When you're working with this, now you're working with silicone, one, how do you do you actually see the color while you're it's drying? Does it ever change? It was interesting to listen to his Mario's thing where, you know, with ceramics, you can't tell what you're doing. So that's fascinating in of itself. But do you see the colors as they are? I kind of assume that, and then that way that you're making them transparent was just fascinating, because I've used obviously rubbers to cast. And is this a completely different material than casting rubber?
Let's let Victoria answer that, shall we?
Okay.
Yes. And I use two different, when I made those architectural pieces, I was using two different kinds of silicone rubber. And one of the kinds was an industrial rubber that is water clear when it hardens. And it's actually used to isolate electrical components so that you can see them. But I guess it preserves them somewhat. And I add a special silicone pigment. So I would cast slabs initially in that, and then use those slabs as building blocks. But the industrial rubber is somewhat fragile. It could break apart. So then I would coat with another kind of silicone rubber that is used for mold making, not quite as water clear, but has a toughness, so it would make a tough skin.
One quick follow-up, is this archival? Is this stuff, what is the longevity of this?
Silicone is very archival.
Okay.
And I don't know, the polyurethane based rubber, I have pieces that are, over 20 years old, and they haven't deteriorated at all. The one thing about that particular polyurethane rubber, though, is that with time, it becomes a little more orange over time, so that the blue colors tended to dull over time.
Oh,
But I mostly, when I was doing those, I used mostly colors in the reds and yellows and warm colors.
Can we have a comment or
There's a
from someone
question
else?
in the chat. I'll read the question. It's
Great.
from Suzanne. I think it's for Shelley. Beautiful pieces. Curious what brought you to metal and fabrication. Was it a commission? What materials were you working in beforehand?
I was doing collages with fabric and different sorts of indoor things. And somebody said, wow, you should do something for outdoors. And I thought, what could that possibly be? And I started with some hardware cloth because I like the idea of the transparency, trying to assemble them myself with hardware cloth and different experiments. And they collapsed. And there was complete failure because they're not strong enough to withstand the outdoors. So it was a process of just really trying to find what material would work out there. And I finally came upon we went to steel, which was not good because steel rusts. Even though we would powder coat it, it rusts. So it was a process of a learning process. I wanted to talk about transitioning through existence and having one thing overlap with another and passing through existence. And that's what really motivated the shapes that I was doing.
Do we have someone else or?
Yes, one more comment. Love the color sensibilities of all of you. Did any of you start out with any other kinds of work besides sculpture?
Not in my case. I always did tactile. I always did reliefs or collages. Can I tell you one funny story? Take a minute. When I first thought they had to be flat, picture flat, and they kept rising up. And I actually drove my car over one of my works to try to flatten it down until I realized, no, it's speaking to you. It wants to be three-dimensional. It wants to speak. So it had its own voice.
Uh-huh.
Victoria? Did you always work in sculpture?
Yes.
Sure.
But even when I make something that hangs on the wall and is somewhat two-dimensional, I think of them, I approach them as objects. I don't think of myself as a painter, even if it's hanging on the wall. Just because of the mechanical way that I apply the paint and the process.
I think we could thank everyone. Miriam, I think that would be a nice
Yes.
we could do
Thank
that.
you for wonderful presentations.
And we thank you. We thank you.
And Shelley and Mario, I really enjoyed seeing your work. Hope to see more in the future.
And Shelley, I have a bunch of questions for you. I would love to get in touch with you.
Anytime.
All right, can you, where can I get your email?
Go to Colorfield Sculpture at AOL.
.com, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for a terrific presentations and questions and engagement. And thanks to everyone, Maruna and others that helped to bring about this production. So
Yeah,
hope
thank you.
to see you again, and good night.
Good night.